We have had the new points, and I say that as a relative term for people who have played 8th or 9th edition, but we have had points for a week. I wasn't happy with the way it was done. Several thousand of you darlings and viewers popped up, seemingly out of nowhere, it was probably Deep Strike, to comment that you too were not happy with the points. Some units are suffering on the tabletop from the few games we have played. Some factions are overall doing well from what should be stressed is a week of playtesting. Who are the winners, who are the losers, and how do we move on with these points? Well, the big losers are most of us who didn't like power. That's why I've been saying points in quotation marks. It's basically the same as power, but they changed the numbers to be bigger. Because monkey brain mean bigger number must be better, right? No, I think we all see through that. Okay, Age of Sigmar also has points kind of like this, but there's very few weapon options for the unit and it has internal balance. But for 40k, we can see that the Palatine Bolt Pistol is not as good as the Palatine's Plasma Pistol. Unless you were a Melter Bolter Flamer purist like myself. But maybe that explains why you don't get the much nicer Canoness Viridian model for less money than this one lady. We didn't like power level for competitive games, but we got power dressed as points. Consider transports. I suggested only last week in my video on the Space Marines that you do something with Centurions. 4 Centurions fit inside a 12 space transport. Well, there's no benefit really to only fitting 3. You'd think, oh yeah, well then you add a character. But that unit can't take any characters. And putting 4 models, each taking up the space of 3, 4 times 3 is 12, okay, you fill the transport capacity. But that's a problem because 4 of them costs way more than 3 of them. And you could agree with your opponent to do points per model. Easy way to figure it out, 10 models, they cost 110 points, that's 11 points per model. Stick to the rules on special weapon amounts as best you can, but the issues then are you can't get a casual game at a local club doing that, because no one's going to expect it. And some models will end up with things like 5.5 points. So when you're building your units, I think you should go for the what you see is what you get advice. Remember to include special weapons from the sprue, but don't really worry which ones are best or not best. Just be happy with how your model looks. Depending on your opponent, you could agree, okay, I'll let you say that Sergeant has a Thunderhammer, not a Power Sword, and my Acolyte Auto Pistols are Hand Flamers instead. I mean, if Games Workshop are doing that, why not just have Acolyte Pistols at 3 shot, strength 3 that auto hits? They've amalgamated so many other kinds of weapons. When it comes to optimizing things for battle, remember that playing competitively is just one relatively small part of the hobby. We shouldn't surrender all other parts of the hobby, like the lore, painting, modeling, stuff looking cool, to accommodate points optimization, which is going to change in 3 months. And probably sooner if you're a Space Marine or Tyranid player. So if you have a very beautiful Wraith Lord without a huge murder sword, just leave it as be, and it'll be fine. If you were wondering with points why the fortifications are costing so much, there's no limit on where you can put them other than they are a unit in your deployment zone. You and your models, you can walk over them. Yeah, height difference to a human towards the models. Okay, your models can walk through them, but opponents can't. So you can use them for some pretty irritating shenanigans to block enemy movement really hard. Have an objective and surround it completely with an Aegis defense line. Now, the enemy is either going to have to pull some Genestealer Cult 3 and shenanigans to pop onto that objective, or they're going to have to destroy that defense line in order to get onto the objective beyond it. So that is why fortifications are costing so many points. It's a bit of a cheeky move, but there you go. Okay, with these point stuff, some caveats to remember. I haven't played many games of 10th edition, so there's limited data for me to go off. Also remember, we are looking at these units and characters. They now combine in different ways. It's not generic aura for lots of core units. Part of the unit's points will be based around the units that they combine with. So this is part of what we need to consider for balance. A Patriarch might be amazing for its points, but it doesn't have lone operative, and can be easily shot because of its size, and just being near other units won't help. So you consider what other units it can actually be paired with, and there's only one thing that it can ever go with. Characters that give auras also have to factor in the units they can join. There are 60 points between a Primus with 3 wounds and toughness 3, and a massive beast of a character like Morwen Val. And both of them give full rerolls to hit. However, Val can only support 1 squad of 3 Paragon Warsuits. The Primus can support 10 Acolytes, or 20 Deep Striking Neophytes, or Metamorphs, and the Primus can take enhancements while Val can't, and that is something that the balance all sort of has to factor in. I'm going to be talking briefly about several factions, starting in the middle and then going up, and then after the army that I think is doing the best after 1 week of playtesting, pivot hard and go to the weaker and then the weakest faction just for that extra whiplash. If you look at my videos on why the Sisters are not being played a lot, the same issue has come up in 10th edition. Points compared to Space Marines. Here's a 5-man Devastator squad. They even have a cherub that basically gives them a 6 as a miracle dice. Here's 5 Retributors, costing 10 points more, and yet having lower toughness, fewer wounds. And it just means again, they're going to be losing out to Black Templars, who have the same kind of theme, same kind of units, but do more, are tougher, and are point for point more efficient. Oh yeah, and Miracle Dice it's a long and confusing rule that I'm trying to get my head around. It doesn't seem as good as Eldar Fate Dice. Like, oh yeah, the Eldar get them at the start and spend them as you go along, but they also have ways to get more of them, like with Guardians. Battle Sisters start with none, and slowly accumulate them as the battle goes on, and our units die. The Battle Sister points, generally, could just do with being reduced. Please! So a nice faction doing perhaps a bit above average are Chaos Knights. The Chaos Knights are a lot cheaper than before, comparing of course to 9th edition, a totally different edition. They're very tough, still, and kind of a polarizing army. You're going to need to have enough anti-tank to be able to even fight them on the battlefield. But there are a lot of ways to take them out, and I've mentioned this in previous videos. My first game of 10th edition was against Chaos Knights with my Genestealer cult. They are tough seeming, but they do go down. And I use the 3 tactics that I've already suggested in my Genestealer cult videos. I do practice what I suggest. 5-man demolition team with tunnel crawlers blew up a war dog in one go. A Primus with 10 acolytes using mining weapons and no extra support almost took down a war dog in one go. I used aberrants with an abominant doing a rapid ingress to be more sure of their charge in the following turn. It went mostly well. If you're thinking that the Genestealer cult ability to get a new unit after one has died, they don't die, remember, it's not super effective. You're not going to be facing the same army 2 or 3 times over. It's only going to be great to counter alpha strikes if you lose units in turn 1 or 2. Then you'll be setting up a token really more than 20 inches away from the enemy and very much out of position. So the only real benefit against an army with very few units, like the Chaos Knights, is that you can return a unit straight onto an objective that's unoccupied. The Chaos Knights causing battle shock was a problem, and on my turn 4, there was only one far off Brood Brothers heavy weapon team that was not battle shocked. Battle shock is horrible, because you won't score things in your command phase, you won't be able to contest enemy units in their command phase, and any of the secondary things that require you to take an objective by the end of the turn, you won't be able to do them. That is why, when I was ranking the stratagems, Insane Bravery is definitely the best stratagem. Battle shock really hurts, because you're not scoring victory points, and you can't use stratagem shenanigans, and Genestealer cult really need to use command point stratagems. The Chaos Knights Fear Aura take a bit to wind up. Turn 3 is when they're best, so armies that alpha strike against them won't be particularly affected, but Genestealer cult, an army that basically skips their first turn, oh, I really felt it. I definitely suffered. And in the end, it was a draw, point for point. With the Chaos Knights and Knights generally, A new difficulty you have is fitting onto an objective, because you cannot finish your move on top of the objective marker. You can move over it, but you cannot finish your move on top of it. So you have to kind of maneuver around this extra token to slightly shimmy into enemy units, or you want to be blocking only one side of an objective but totally exposed from the others, so that a Genestealer cult unit can pop up 3 inches away and still be on the objective. For example, I think Imperial Knights are doing better than Chaos Knights because they also have access to the Imperial allies. They can have really nice snipers, well, quite nice snipers, and cheap Inquisitor warlords. You could be Chaos Knights and add demons in, but that expressly stops you from any demons being a warlord. So Imperials can run an army of all armigers and an Inquisitor to have board control and very tough units. If you have the models already, try that out. I think it'll be a very good tactic. The Tyranids that come in the Leviathan box are actually pretty middle. The Barbgaunt units are very cheap, and you can split fire, like I've said, to slow down the enemy, and they only cost 50 points. It's not as scary as you think. You can slow down maybe 1 or 2 units. You need line of sight, this isn't a bombardment, and you only have 24-inch range, so you're probably going to be moving out into the open to hit anything more than 1 unit anywhere. And it only affects infantry, so your vehicles and mounted fast units are going to be unaffected. Still needs an FAQ or correction, but Barbgaunts are not the horrors that you think they are. Neurogaunts are hilariously rubbish, but they're super cheap for holding objectives, and anything nearby, like Barbgaunts and Biovors, can then have synapse as you chain it from the Neurogaunts. At least they have toughness 3 compared to toughness 2 like Gretchen. I mean, I say toughness 2. Wait until the second part of index errors, and I'll explain that one. The Tyranids get pretty cheap monsters. A Carnifex is 125 points, but so is the much tougher Haruspex. That's some odd internal balance right there. Yeah, you get a gun as a Carnifex, but I'd rather have way more toughness and wounds. That's even tougher than the Screamer Killer, which costs 55 more points than the Haruspex. So perhaps that one unit is rather undercosted. The demons also have a kind of odd internal balance. The greater demons have sort of similar profiles, but there's a lot of points between them. Like, a Keeper of Secrets costs 5 points more than Bellicor, and there is 100 points between the Keeper of Secrets and a Lord of Change. It's a lot of points, and you can switch out a Demon Prince or a Lord of Change for just 15 extra points. So I haven't really been able to get a handle on how the demons sit, because demon players haven't been able to get a handle on how to run demons. If you know, let me know in the comments. Okay, let's look at the 2 top tier factions as far as I can tell, based on points, based on 1 week of playing. The one I'm going to get flack for, the second best, so not the best, are Eldar. Yes, they have a fire prism that is 125 points. So much cheaper than a tactical squad, a Skitarii Ranger squad, and yet doing so much more. So the question is, do you take 1 guaranteed, or do you expect that your Eldar players are going to have 3 guaranteed? Well, there's a hard caveat to this. Remaining calm. Let's not theory hammer scream our way through this. I know YouTubers have to hype and rave, but remember, most casual Eldar players don't even have 1 fire prism, let alone 3. And how many Eldar players are going to buy 1 just hoping that the points stay like this long enough to build it and paint it and get some games in with it? I try and be tabletop realistic rather than just theory hammer. But if you are playing against an Eldar opponent, probably expect 1. Their aspect warriors are kind of average, and when I played against them, they definitely went down. If you do think Eldar are tough, I am working on a video about how to beat them. I just need to play more games of 10th edition against them. So as aspect warriors are not as good, we're seeing a new way of playing Eldar. Last edition, at least locally, and maybe, you know, for a lot of you as well, the meta was all about wraiths. Iyanden style, Wraith Guard, Wraith Knights, Wraith Lords, and a Spirit Seer. Well, now we're seeing much more of the Ulthway style. Lots of Guardians to generate those fate dice, And then vehicles, piloted by Guardians, like your Fire Prisms, your Falcons, and your Wave Serpents, led by a strong psychic base of Farseers. The Wraith style is still very effective, but we're definitely seeing a shift, and maybe, the shattering of Aeltan might have had something to do with that. Just to try and connect the lore to the tabletop. D cannons and D support weapons, I expect, should be corrected, when all of the other index cards are corrected. So either fate dice don't count as critical wounds, or the amount of damage done will be dropped. It's an indirect fire thing. That bit is the more important one. And that is why I think the Imperial Guard are the best performing faction right now. Indirect fire is the key. Basilisk and Wyvern for about 100 points, and the Forge World Medusa Siege Battery for 65 points. 60 points for 3 mortars that can fire indirectly, unlike those Tyranid Barbgaunts that everyone was worried about. Give them the order to take aim that improves their ballistic skill by 1, and with a detachment rule, Born Soldiers for lethal hits, and you are truly shattering the skies across a massive amount of the board. And a lot of Guard players already have mortars and basilisks. So this isn't some really niche Forge World unit that you're going to have to buy loads of just to be effective. They've already got these units, and they're really good. The Sentinels are very cheap for 50 points. The Armoured Sentinels are still 70 points for a 2-up save, decent toughness, and several more wounds than you'd expect. For the Infantry, it's 10 men for 65 points, or about 20 with heavy weapons and such for 130 points. That is cheaper than Neophytes, and you get nearly twice the bodies compared to Guardians or Skitarii at the same toughness. You can add in a platoon command squad so that you have the full 25-man platoon in one, and the platoon medic will give the entire unit feel no pain on a 6+. So you're going to be, pretty survivable just from the number of bodies. And then, if the enemy does manage to blow through your 3 Sentinels or the 20 men that you've had in that massive squad, 2 command points, you can bring it back and do the whole thing over again. And this massive squad, which has a really powerful objective control score, can also have a commissar. So even if you think, oh well, if I battle shock that relatively low leadership unit, then they'll be knocked out. Doesn't matter how big their OC is if it gets reset to 0. Well, the Commissar lets them re-roll their morale tests, and at the start of any phase, he can shoot a dude, and they immediately stop being battle shocked. And that is so important, because remember, battle shock is how you lose the game, because controlling objectives is how you win the game. 35 points to make sure your infantry win the game. Really strong, I think. If you don't like regular infantry squads or Cadian infantry squads, now the Death Corps of Krieg, you can improve their to-hit roll. No, you improve their ballistic skill with Take Aim, which is different to improving their hit roll. So, rules as written as far as I can tell, if you use the Take Aim order, then they're hitting on a 3+, because it changes their ballistic skill, and with their Grim Demeanor, if they're below starting strength, they get another +1 to hit. So now you're hitting on 2s with your melter guns and plasma guns. And now your 130 point unit is putting out more damage than any Battle Sister Dominion squad at a much higher accuracy. And there's more. Allies and such. The Imperial Guard can have some very strong allies. Anything you think that's lacking in your own force, you can add in some Imperial agents. If you're missing a really big monster, get an Imperial Knight, because you can take them to do all of your horrible stuff. So if the points change at any time in the near future, and some of those other units become very points optimal, you can add them into your Imperial Guard army and take advantage of that. And I will be doing a video on how to take advantage of other things that are in this Imperial Guard video in your Genestealer cult army. Brood brothers, brood sisters, shall we? So it's the Imperial Guard, not the Eldar, that I think are the army that is doing the best right now. Whiplash time! So, who is doing the worst? Yes, that's the prelude we need. Death Guard. They are still very tough. Toughness 5 is important against what the majority of armies are, Space Marine types with sort of bolt gun strength 4 weapons as standard. But the points disparity between other factions means that they're not doing great. They're not as bad as you would expect. Still, in a video that's mainly about the points levels, they are certainly low down. In smaller games, their ability to have sticky, icky, nurglified objectives and walk away from them is a lot more useful. More so than I thought, but I have Genestealer cult brain and I'm constantly assuming that from somewhere, a figure is just going to appear and mess with your objective. They are lacking power and points comparisons to the other Chaos factions, but they have some advantages. Some. They have very cheap Terminators. 5 Blightlord Terminators for 175 points is cheaper than anything that Space Marines have. So I think Death Guard are playable. It's not the best, but I think you'll still have fun with them, especially if you like the very fluffy side. See how it does on the battlefield. Remember, one data point of your one game that you've played so far is not enough to go off. As long as you're having fun with the army, keep having fun playing that army. So if it's not Death Guard that's the worst hit, well, do I need to say who it is? Maybe I should just leave the video there. Okay, the weakest are AdMech. 130 points for Rangers? That's like Morwen Val. Or 20 Cadians for the same toughness and the same save. Cadians compared to Rangers, and you get twice as many Cadians. Compared to Battle Sisters, it's more points for their Rangers than 10 Battle Sisters, and the Battle Sisters have a 3+ save rather than a 5+ save. Their Servitors pale in comparison to the Astarte Servitors for only 5 points difference. More than 100 points for each Castellan robot will mean that you can't really go tough instead of Hordy. The Vanguard are cheaper at 10 points a model, but they're not particularly effective compared to what you can get for the same points for other factions. Even if their Iron Strider Ballistarii is 50 points for a decent platform, compared to, say, the Sentinels or the Eldar Viper, one shot with a las cannon isn't that great when you compare it to the Eldar rules you can have on the Viper. And also, you know, if you're Genestealer cults, for 50 points you can get a Nexus so that one unit can do a stratagem every turn for free. They have such a relatively small pool of units to choose from that as soon as some of them are badly costed, it affects the whole army. If this was the sort of same thing with Space Marines, it wouldn't really matter. It would just be like, oh, those units are not great to play right now in this edition. Here's the 182 other units that you could play instead as a Space Marine player. That number is randomly chosen, but you can see how many of you believe that, oh yeah, there are at least 182 extra other Space Marine units to choose from. Yeah. So I think it sucks for the AdMech at the moment. So that's what I thought of some of the factions in the first week of their release in 10th edition. I didn't mention all factions because I have limited data and I don't just want to rely on what someone on the internet said in a video. So I've made this video and put it on the internet so that people would know what to believe. Yeah, feel free to argue with me in the comments. Well, not argue, but state why I was wrong, and then I will look at that and think, interesting. If I say something is amazing in theory, then comments say, actually that situation is super unlikely to come up. If I say that fire prisms are not realistically going to be spammed, there will be someone in the comments saying, I know someone with 9 fire prisms and he had his hands replaced with fire prisms in illegal surgery that happened in a backstreet in Nottingham. But you didn't come to watch my videos because you wanted to find someone who agrees with you. Oh, you did? Oh no. Well, I guess I better make some more content so that there's something you can truly 100% agree with and enjoy. But that is all you'll get from me this week, except for Sunday. Then I have my new outfit reveal. The link is already on the live tab on my channel. Click the notify button if you don't want to forget. It's a big VTuber thing, relatively. I'm not corporate, so I don't have money behind me, but it is a fun thing for reaching 500 subscribers last week. Yes, I am aware of the current number, but there's no way I have time to plan anything for 1,000 subscribers. If the VTuber side isn't your thing, I'll see you next week for Genestealer Cult, since those are popular, the more unusual Chaos units, and inevitably some news. I've seen that the Index Card Errors video received far more than 100 likes after 24 hours, and I was going to give it 2 weeks to reach that. Well, okay, I am already working on a part 2. I'll try and make it as funny, but remember there are reasons why sequels don't normally do so well. That will come the week after next. And somewhere in all of this, I'll actually play some more 40k. My darlings and viewers, make your choice. Chaos Cultist or Child of the Star Gods. I hope to see you Sunday!